I mean, it's got a great following and everything else, but the same could be said for soccer because it really, I think, in the last 10 years has started to pick up here in the States. But I was thrilled to be watching the female soccer World Cup. And I kept saying, wow, we women have come a long way, baby. When you look at just how the following developed in just this most recent World Cup, I was actually really pleased to see it. And I think that when people start to embrace women's sports, they actually start to embrace women in general. And I think that there's something really empowering about the championship that occurred during that time. And I think that it's starting to grow as a spectator sport here in the States, more so than it ever has. So I'm really looking forward to seeing rugby go through the same metamorphosis here in the States. And like I said, I mean, I saw it a lot when I was a kid and really miss having it accessible. I hardly ever hear about it now. And so I'll start looking for it now that I've met you. But it's exciting. And, congratulations on all of the success. And I know that your work in advocating for CBD for athletes is it's so important. Can't stress it enough. Just because we have a very broad audience in a lot of states, people may not be familiar with the sport of rugby. I was because of my early exposure to it. But for people who don't understand what it is, can you kind of explain in layman's terms what the difference is between rugby and football and soccer?
Yeah. So the way that rugby started was a schoolboy in England named William Webb Ellis. They were playing soccer, and he picked up the ball and ran with it. And from there, they just started inventing a different game. And what that evolved into was the sport of rugby. And so a rugby ball is the same shape as a football, but it's bigger and fatter. You can't pass the ball forward. It can go laterally or backwards, but you can kick it forward out of your hand at any time. It is a complex game with many rules, but it doesn't stop. It's very flowing. It stops for resets here and there if something goes wrong, but it's not like football where there's a tackle and then everybody stops and regroups. In rugby, when there's a tackle, then you have a contest for possession of the ball, kind of who can push who backward over the ball. If you can step over it, then you get to keep it. That's called a ruck. And so in rugby, football, interestingly enough, came from rugby. They took, much like rugby took soccer as an inspiration and then just completely changed it. Football sort of did the same. That might be why in football you have a touchdown, but you don't have to touch the ball down. You just have to break the plane. In rugby, when you score, it's called a try. And part of scoring a try is that you have to touch the ball down in the try zone with downward pressure and control. So you touch it down, but it's called a try. In football, you don't touch it down, but it's called a touchdown. And you also don't use your feet, in football, really. So anyway, but that's kind of a little bit of a synopsis. So it's a very physical and fast-flowing game. We don't wear helmets or pads. There are a lot of different rules to it and technicalities, which can be exciting. Sevens can be a great introduction to the game because it is more simplified. And so in regular rugby union, there are 15 players aside out on the pitch, on the field. In sevens, you have the same size field, but only 7 people per side out there. So it's wide open, very athletic, very fast game. And it is a little bit more streamlined in terms of the rules. So it could be a little easier to learn if you're new to the sport. But both versions are very exciting to watch. And, you do start to pick up on the nuances, especially if you're watching professional rugby from places like New Zealand. The commentators are excellent. Rugby is a national sport of New Zealand, so it's very much a part of their culture. So yeah, I would just encourage anybody who likes kind of exciting sports to take a look at rugby because you might just fall in love.
No doubt. Absolutely, no doubt. Well, like in touch football, for example, there are no tackling. You're not going to tackle one another and throw each other to the ground. And touch, that would be like a tackle in a way, just body contact that way. Is there any sort of contact that makes rules for you in rugby?
Yeah, so rugby is full contact tackle sport. So you tackle, you also ruck, which is that contest after someone's tackled, and they're on the ground and both teams.
Okay, I guess my memory is not serving me as well because I don't recall that. So it's odd that there are no helmets.
Well, yeah. So I think it's such a part of the fabric of the game that maybe it's less like an incident. It's more of like just part of the glue of everything that just keeps happening. Um, so yeah, so it's full tackle. Um, there is also touch rugby, which is its own sport, and it's not just rugby with touching instead of tackling. It's actually has its own strategies. There's only 6 players per side. It's a different size field. There's all these different rules. I play that sport too, and it's fun. But contact rugby does, have my major passion.
Well, you know what? That might be what I'm thinking about and recalling, from the teams that I saw come up from Australia and New Zealand in the summertime. So yeah, that may be what I'm remembering. And they were young too, so it's possible that there was a difference because of their age. They weren't tackling one another so much, but
It's true. And touch rugby is a very popular sport in its own right in Australia and New Zealand. There are hundreds of thousands of people who play. And so, and for kids, oftentimes they start out playing touch rugby, even though, obviously adults play as well. Um, that's something that we're starting to have here in the US too. Touch rugby is growing more, and touch rugby for kids. And organizations like Girls Rugby is for young girls, and it's touch, and they teach them the foundations of rugby, and it can be a great entry into the sport, whether you end up playing touch or contact rugby or both.
yeah. Well, and for girls, sports in general, like I said early on in this conversation, can be very empowering. And, just learning to compete, learning to respect your players and to be part of a team and belong to something. I would think that that is really important for the development of a girl. Can you speak to that?
I would absolutely agree. Rugby has a big emphasis on teamwork. It's not a sport where you can win with just individual effort. There are amazing individual efforts that will shine, but you really have to work as a team to be to play the game like it should be played and to be successful. And I think that type of sport also teaches leadership. It teaches you diplomacy and managing teams, managing interpersonal relationships, and how to work with people, who might not necessarily be your friend, but you need to accomplish something together. So in that way, I think rugby can really prepare people, but especially women, for success in business and other endeavors, because there are a lot of transferable skills, and also I think for women in particular, rugby's emphasis on function and performance over appearance. It's not what you look like, it's what can you do, and how tenacious are you. Whether that is your body size and shape, whether you're a really big person, we can use you on the rugby field. If you're very small, we can probably also use you. It's really all about mindset. Some of the toughest players I've played with are physically very small, but their presence on the field is a lot bigger because they have what we call mongrel. They just get in there and they make you know their presence and feel it with their physical actions. So I think for women that can be really empowering because our society does place so much emphasis on looks for women and the shapes of our bodies. And it's hard to care as much about those things when you care about performance. You know, your weight relates only to how heavy or light am I for pushing in a scrum or being lifted in a line out, or finding that ratio between speed and power. What weight is ideal for me to be at my fastest but also strongest. And if my muscles look good, that's great, but what can they do? That's, I think, something very priceless about rugby.
I love that. And mongrel, I'm going to have to remember that word. To me, it's like moxie or confidence. It's that feeling of being empowered. I love that. I'm going to steal that word. Anyway, but you received your Master in Arts in Communications from the University of Portland. And then I noticed also that you CBD certification. So few educational institutions actually cover endocannabinoid system or the many uses and advantages of cannabis and CBD in particular. Tell me a little bit about that certification program.
Yeah. So just to really clarify that, the name of the program is CBD Certified. That's the educational program that I lead, or we do the workshops and classes. So sometimes people want to know, well, what does this certification entail? And we don't like to view it as an official certification. It's just that CBD certified is just the name of the class. It's what we came up with. Like, you're CBD certified. You studied this. You know about CBD now. So I think that because it gets a little bit tricky. Who is qualified to certify someone in these things? Now we're starting to see established educational institutions creating programs of study for cannabis and cannabis science, which is exciting. And I think we still have a little ways to go. And then there are a lot of third-party educational programs that are great resources, but they are not cheap. And so with our program, we made it free because we really want to get this information out to people so that they can use it to better their lives. And so we want to make it accessible. And for us, for East Fork, we are an organic cannabis and hemp farm in Southern Oregon. And so we don't view ourselves as being in the business of education. So we talked about how to approach this. Like, we don't want to go and start a whole nother business, right? Providing education. But what we will do is invest our resources in giving back to the community through this free educational program. And so for me, it's really exciting because I get to empower people with knowledge. And I also, this is this area of personal interest for me. And so I get to stay up on all the latest cannabis science, reading research all the time, attending conferences, and then sharing that with other people. And so I think, to be CBD certified, you can take the class and then, you're certified. We have a pin you can have. But really, because this is such an evolving knowledge area, we have new research coming out all the time. It's pretty hard to just do like a one and done, like, okay, you know everything, because the knowledge is a moving target. So that's why I think it's really important to stay engaged in paying attention to the data that's coming out and the science. And so I think I'm not sure if the universities that are starting to offer these programs know what they're in for quite yet and how fast things change. But I do think that it's great that we are seeing more of these resources. And I really look forward to the medical community coming on board. Like you mentioned, there are so many people. That's an area where the research science has not been integrated into the clinical providers' repertoire to large degree. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I